All right, let's dive right in, shall we? Today, we're tackling a leader who's really stirred up some serious debate. Nicolás Maduro, visionary. Or is he more of a con artist, cleverly disguised as a president?
It's a question that, well, that has followed powerful figures throughout history, hasn't it? How do we separate the real change makers from, well, from those just seeking power or personal gain?
You've hit the nail right on the head there.
Yeah.
And to help us untangle this whole puzzle, you've sent us a ton of information. We've got articles here from sources like the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, even reports from organizations like Amnesty International. We've even got some social media chatter mixed in there.
Wow, that's quite a collection. It seems like we've got, well, everything we need to really unpack Maduro's story, don't we?
Yeah, I think so. So where do we even begin with this?
Well, I think we should probably rewind a bit, right? Go back to his early days before he was in the political spotlight.
Yeah, before the presidency, before all the controversy.
Exactly. So Maduro's story, it starts a long way from the presidential palace. He was a bus driver, actually, and a union leader, someone very much connected to the everyday struggles of the working class.
Interesting. That seems like a world away from the polished image of a president.
It does, doesn't it?
So does his background, do you think it plays into his ideology, his vision for Venezuela?
It certainly seems to. He became a protege of Hugo Chavez, another very charismatic leader who championed those socialist ideals and, well, promised to uplift the masses.
So Maduro kind of inherited this mantle of social change from Chavez.
Precisely. When Chavez appointed him as vice president back in 2012, it was almost like passing the torch, you know? And then when Chavez died in 2013, Maduro just stepped right into his shoes, assuming the presidency.
But stepping into those shoes, that meant facing a nation that was already pretty divided, right?
Absolutely. The 2013 election, it was a really narrow victory against Henryk Capriles Radonsky, and it sparked a lot of allegations of fraud and manipulation, really set the stage for what would become a very turbulent presidency.
So even from the start, there were questions surrounding Maduro's leadership. So what happened next? Did he try to unify the country, or did these divisions just get worse?
Well, let's look at how he dealt with key institutions. Maduro moved to consolidate his power over the Supreme Court and the National Electoral Council. Those moves, they raised a lot of red flags for people concerned about democracy in Venezuela.
So essentially, he was stacking the deck in his favor.
That's how a lot of people saw it. Critics argued that these actions weren't really about strengthening Venezuela, but rather about, well, about tightening his own grip on power.
And wasn't this also the time when the country was plunged into that really devastating economic crisis?
Yes, and it's a critical piece of the puzzle here. Despite having vast oil wealth, Venezuela's economy just went into a complete free fall. Hyperinflation reached just astronomical levels. I mean, the bolivar became practically worthless. In 2012, you could exchange 9 bolivars for $1, but by 2015, that number had skyrocketed to 921.
Wow, that's almost unbelievable. It's hard to even fathom the impact that must have had on everyday people.
It was a time of incredible hardship for Venezuelans. Food, medicine, they became incredibly scarce. Poverty just soared, and protests were erupting all over the country. People were, well, they were desperate for solutions. And Maduro's response was to establish the local committees for supply and production, which is better known as CLAP.
CLAP, right, the Food Distribution Program. That's been at the center of so much controversy. But on the surface, at least, it seems like a vital lifeline during a crisis. Was there more to it?
Yeah, that's where the lines between good intentions and potential manipulation, well, they get really blurry. See, while CLP aimed to provide subsidized food to people who desperately needed it, critics argued that it was really being used as a tool for political gain.
How so?
Imagine a system where your access to food, like a basic human need, it hinges on your political loyalty. There were all these allegations that CLAP was used to reward government supporters, to punish those who dissented. It was a way to silence opposition and really solidify control.
So the very system that was meant to alleviate suffering was potentially being used to exploit it.
That's a very serious accusation, and it really ties into these broader allegations of corruption that have been swirling around Maduro's regime.
And that's something I definitely want to unpack further.
Me too. But I think we'll have to save that and the shadowy figure of Alex Saab for the next part of our deep dive.
So we left off talking about that CLIP program, potentially being used as a tool for control during a time of crisis. But these accusations against Maduro, they go much deeper than that. We're talking a whole murky world of corruption. Where do we even begin to try and unravel this web?
Well, you're right. It's a tangled mess. But I think a good place to start might be with Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index. They consistently rank Venezuela as one of the most corrupt countries in the entire world.
Hmm.
And in 2023, they gave it a score of just 14 out of 100.
Wow, that's shockingly low. What's driving that perception?
Well, the allegations, they're wide-ranging, and frankly, they're pretty disturbing. We're talking about embezzlement of public funds, money laundering schemes, even involvement in drug trafficking, and then there's the manipulation of government programs just for personal gain. It really raises serious questions about where all of Venezuela's wealth is going and who's actually benefiting from it.
And if these allegations are true, it's the Venezuelan people who are ultimately paying the price.
Absolutely, and not just through economic hardship,
Yeah.
but also the erosion of their basic rights. We have a report here, a 2022 report from Amnesty International, and they detail a pretty systematic strategy of repression orchestrated by the Maduro government.
Repression, what forms does that take?
Well, think arbitrary detentions, torture, even extrajudicial killings. It's chilling. These are tactics that are clearly aimed at silencing any kind of dissent and just crushing any opposition to Maduro's rule.
So it's not just about controlling the resources and the wealth. It's also about controlling the narrative, controlling people's voices.
Exactly. And this climate of fear, it becomes even more apparent when we look at the 2024 presidential election. Maduro, he was declared the winner, but the whole process was just shrouded in controversy.
Right. The opposition claimed there was widespread vote manipulation. They presented those voting tally receipts as evidence.
They did, and it really fueled international condemnation. I mean, over 50 countries, including the U.S., they refused to recognize Maduro's victory. And then you have the opposition candidate, Edmundo Gonzalez. He actually went into hiding. He was so afraid for his safety.
It sounds like a really volatile situation
Yeah.
with trust completely broken down.
Yeah.
What were the repercussions of this disputed election?
Well, the U.S., they imposed sanctions. They targeted key figures in Maduro's government, which further isolated Venezuela on the world stage, and things escalated pretty quickly from there. The U.S., they seized a Venezuelan cargo plane that was in Argentina, and then they even confiscated Maduro's private jet, a $13 million jet, in this whole dramatic sequence of events.
It sounds like some kind of international chess match almost.
Yeah.
Each side making these strategic moves to try and gain leverage.
It's a high-stakes game, that's for sure. And speaking of strategic moves, there's one name that just keeps popping up in all of this, Alex Saab.
Ah, Alex Saab. Right. That Colombian businessman.
Yeah.
With those deep ties to Maduro. What role does he play in all of this?
Well, Saab, he's accused of being essentially the mastermind behind this incredibly complex network of corruption that allegedly funneled huge sums of money into the pockets of Maduro and his inner circle.
That's a serious accusation. What's the evidence?
Saab was arrested in Cabo Verde back in 2019 on a U.S. warrant for money laundering, and it was related to the CLAP program. Remember, that's the food distribution program we were talking about.
Oh, right. So not only was CLAP potentially used for political manipulation, but it could have also been a vehicle for corruption.
Yeah, that's exactly what the accusations suggest. In fact, Mexican prosecutors, they even accused the Venezuelan government of buying overpriced and substandard food through Saab, all for CLAP. Essentially, they were profiting from the hunger of their own people.
That's hard to even comprehend. True. I mean, using a program that's designed to help the most vulnerable to line their own pockets. It's a betrayal of trust on just a massive scale.
It is, and it raises those uncomfortable questions about Maduro's true motives. Is he really a champion of the poor, like his supporters claim, or is he more concerned with enriching himself and his allies?
These are questions we really need to grapple with as we continue analyzing all of this information. But there's another layer to this story that I don't think we can ignore, and that's the Essequibo dispute with Guyana. It's a territorial conflict that's been going on for a long time. But under Maduro, it's definitely taken on a much more menacing tone.
This is where things get particularly interesting. I mean, this dispute, it's been simmering for decades, right? But Maduro's recent military buildup in the region, it's raised a lot of alarms. We're talking fighter jets, missiles, even a new bridge and a military base that are positioned very strategically near that disputed border.
It sounds like a very dangerous situation. Is this just a show of force? Or is Maduro really prepared to escalate this conflict?
That's a question that's really dividing a lot of experts. Some people, they see it as a calculated tactic, just to distract from all of Venezuela's internal turmoil, to rally some nationalist sentiment, to try and position Maduro as this strong leader who's defending the nation's sovereignty.
Classic diversionary tactics.
Exactly. But then others, they believe that this is a genuine attempt to assert Venezuela's claim over the Essequibo region, which happens to be rich in natural resources like oil and gold.
So potentially a land grab that's fueled by greed.
It's a possibility we can't dismiss. Control over the Essequibo, that could provide Maduro with some much-needed economic relief, potentially lessen his dependence on international markets and those crippling sanctions.
But a move like that carries a lot of risk, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Militarizing the Essequibo region, that increases the risk of miscalculation, of escalation. Any kind of incident, even something that seems minor, could spiral completely out of control and potentially draw in regional and even international actors.
And that could have catastrophic consequences, not just for Venezuela and Guyana, but for the whole region.
You're right, and it all comes back to that central question we keep coming back to. Is Maduro a visionary leader? Or is he a shrewd operator who's willing to use any means necessary to get what he wants?
It's a very complicated question, one that requires us to really carefully consider all of this evidence we've been laying out. But before we try to come up with an answer, I think we need to take a closer look at the case as Alex Saab. His story really offers a unique window into the inner workings of Maduro's regime and those allegations of corruption that have plagued it.
And Saab's trial, it's been unfolding in Miami as we speak. And the details that have emerged, they're truly remarkable. He's facing charges of money laundering, bribery, conspiracy. U.S. prosecutors, they're alleging that he was basically the architect of this massive scheme to loot Venezuela's coffers.
Wow, no. So this isn't just about one man's alleged crimes. It's about understanding a whole system of corruption that has potentially robbed Venezuela of its wealth and its stability.
Exactly. The prosecution has presented a mountain of evidence. We're talking bank records, emails, witness testimony, and it all paints this picture of this sophisticated network, shell companies, offshore accounts, backroom deals, and all designed to siphon off billions and billions of dollars.
And Saab is portrayed as the central figure in all of this, the man who was pulling the strings and facilitating the flow of all these illicit funds.
Exactly. The prosecution has argued that he used his close relationship with Maduro and other high-ranking officials to secure all these very lucrative contracts, which were often inflated in price, and then he would funnel those kickbacks and bribes back to his benefactors.
It's a story that evokes those images of backroom deals, suitcases full of cash.
Yeah.
Just a blatant disregard for the rule of law.
It does, and it raises the stakes in our assessment of Maduro. Was he truly a leader who genuinely believed in that socialist vision for Venezuela, or was he using that ideology as a smokescreen for personal enrichment and power?
These are tough questions, and I'm sure our listeners are eager to hear your insights on this as we try to untangle this whole complex web of accusations and evidence.
Well, I think we should delve a little deeper into the specific allegations against Saab and how they connect back to Maduro. One of the most damning accusations, it revolves around that CLAP program.
That food distribution program that was supposed to be a lifeline for struggling Venezuelans.
Yeah, that's the one. The U.S. government alleges that Saab, he played a key role in manipulating this program just for his own personal gain, exploiting the hunger of his own people just for profit.
Well, how did he allegedly manage to do that?
Well, according to the prosecution, Saab used a whole network of shell companies to buy overpriced, often really substandard food from international suppliers, and then he allegedly bribed Venezuelan officials to secure those inflated contracts for these goods, funneling millions of dollars into offshore accounts.
So the Venezuelan people, they were not only denied access to quality food, but their government was actively participating in this scheme that was profiting from their suffering.
That's the heart of the accusation. It's a deeply cynical manipulation of a program that was literally meant to provide relief to those who were who are most vulnerable.
It's a betrayal of trust on just a staggering scale, and it raises even more questions about the legitimacy and the integrity of Maduro's leadership. What was Maduro's alleged role in all of this?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's the one that prosecutors have been trying to answer. While there's no direct evidence linking Maduro to those specific transactions that Saab is accused of, the prosecution has argued that Maduro created this environment where this kind of corruption could just flourish.
So meaning a system where cronyism and personal loyalty were more important than transparency and accountability.
Exactly. They argued that Maduro just turned a blind eye to the rampant corruption that was happening all around him, that he prioritized his own grip on power over the welfare of his people.
It's a pretty damning indictment of his leadership, and it adds another layer of complexity to our central question: is Maduro a grifter, or is he gifted?
It does. As we weigh all of this evidence, we have to consider, did Maduro actively participate in these alleged schemes, or was he simply a passive beneficiary of a system that he allowed to fester?
These are really uncomfortable questions, but
Right.
but they're essential ones as we try to make sense of this whole complex and often disturbing story. And as the trial of Alex Saab continues to unfold, we'll undoubtedly gain even more insight into the inner workings of Maduro's regime.
It's a trial that's really captivated the world's attention. It's shining a light on the dark underbelly of power and
Yeah.
the potential for corruption to erode the very fabric of a nation.
And it's a stark reminder that the pursuit of truth and justice, it can be a long and winding road, often filled with obstacles and setbacks.
But it's a road that we have to continue to travel for the sake of the Venezuelan people and for all those who yearn for a world where accountability and transparency they prevail over greed and corruption.
Absolutely. As we move into this final part of our deep dive, we'll try to synthesize all that we've learned. We'll weigh the evidence, and we'll grapple with the complexities of Maduro's legacy.
It's a challenging task, but a necessary one if you want to really understand the man behind the headlines and the impact of his rule on Venezuela and the world.
Okay, so we've journeyed through, well, a lot with Nicolás Maduro, haven't we? We've seen his humble beginnings, starting as a bus driver to this controversial presidency. We've talked about the accusations of corruption, human rights abuses, and a nation that just seems completely divided. So the question remains, is he a visionary leader who's just gotten caught in, difficult circumstances? Or is there something darker going on here?
That's the question we've been grappling with throughout this entire deep dive, haven't we? And I think we need to acknowledge that there isn't a simple answer here. Maduro he's complex. And his story, it's tied to the complexities of Venezuela itself, its history, its politics, its society.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we've seen those moments where he seems like a leader who came from, humble beginnings, embraced those socialist ideals of his mentor, Hugo Chavez, promising to help the marginalized, challenge the status quo. But then those moments, they're often kind of overshadowed by the allegations of corruption, the erosion of, democratic institutions, the brutal crackdown on anyone who disagrees with him.
It's that duality, isn't it, that makes Maduro such a polarizing figure. I mean, his supporters, they see him as this unwavering defender of Venezuela's sovereignty, fighting against those imperialist forces that they believe are trying to exploit the nation's resources. They see him as this champion of social justice, carrying on, Chavez's legacy, fighting for the poor and the working class.
But then his critics, they paint a very different picture, don't they? They see him as an authoritarian who has just systematically dismantled any semblance of democracy, enriching himself and those around him while the country just falls apart economically.
Yeah.
They point to those rigged elections, the silencing of opposition voices, the horrific stories of human rights abuses as proof of his tyrannical rule.
And, the evidence we've looked at, it does raise some serious concerns, doesn't it? The consolidation of power, the manipulation of all those key institutions, the accusations of corruption on such a large scale. Those aren't exactly the hallmarks of a leader who has the best interests of his people at heart.
No,
Right.
no, they really aren't.
Yeah.
And the economic devastation that's happened under his watch, it's undeniable. I mean, hyperinflation has it's crippled the country. The bolivar is basically worthless. Shortages of food, medicine, they're just commonplace.
Yeah.
And it's forced millions of people to flee, to try to find a better life somewhere else.
And then there's that CLOP program, right? That was, well, it was supposed to help to alleviate hunger, but it's become this symbol of the regime's corruption and control. Those accusations that Saab and others profited from people suffering, from their own people suffering. It's incredibly disturbing.
It is. And then you layer on top of that the militarization of the Essequibo region.
Hmm.
Is it a genuine attempt to protect Venezuela, or is it this reckless gamble to distract from all the problems at home, to try to get people to rally around, this idea of nationalism? I mean, the potential for conflict is real, and the consequences could be just devastating.
So where does that leave us? I mean, are we any closer to answering that question? Grifter or gifted?
Well, I think it's safe to say that Maduro's legacy, it's very messy. There are some things that might have started with good intentions, and then there are those actions that point to something much more corrupt. It's a story that people are going to be debating and analyzing for a long time.
And that's what's so interesting about this whole process, isn't it? We've given everyone a way to understand Maduro, to try to separate what's true from what's not, to look at the evidence and then come to their own conclusions.
Yeah, because ultimately it's up to each person, right? To weigh the information, consider all those different perspectives, and then decide what they think about this very complicated and controversial figure.
In a world where charisma and controversy, well, where they seem to go hand in hand, it's so important to really think critically, to ask those tough questions, and to hold our leaders accountable.
Because the truth, it's a journey. It's a journey we all have to take together.
Absolutely. Keep learning, keep asking those questions, and keep diving deep.
That's right. And until next time, stay curious and stay informed.